Lab 7 Enzymes by Emma and Anthony. So our first experiment for this lab was temperature, and the question that we had to answer was, what is the optimal temperature for catechol oxidase activity? And our hypothesis for this question was, the optimal temperature for catechol oxidase activity will be close to 37 degrees Celsius and represented by the test tube with the most color change. Our procedure for this experiment began with us filling 6 test tubes with 1 milliliter of potato extract each, and potato extract in this experiment is the enzyme. Then we placed each test tube in its respective temperature environment for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes was up, we filled each test tube with 1 milliliter of catechol, leaving them in the respective environments for the next 10 minutes. And after those 10 minutes were up, we observed and recorded the color change using the scale below. So, going over these two tables, in test tube 1, we placed in a 0 degrees Celsius environment. For test tube 2, we placed it in a 20 degrees Celsius environment, tube 3, 40 degrees Celsius, tube 4, 60, tube 5, 80, and tube 6, 100 degrees Celsius. And after our experiment was complete, we would observe the color change and base them on the scale that we can see in this table right here. So if there was no color change, we would give that test tube a 0. If there was little color change, we would give it a 1. If there was more color change, we would give it a 2. And the most color change, or the darkest, we would assign a 3. Here are some photos of the environments we used in this experiment. So for our 40 degree, 60 degree, and 80 degree test tubes, we placed them in a preheated hot bath, which you can see in this photo right here, and in separate ones, of course, but this is what they looked like. For our 0 degree test tube, we made an ice bath using ice and water, which you can see in this photo right here. And for our 20 degrees Celsius test tube, we placed it in room temperature water, which you can see here. And then for our 100 degrees Celsius test tube, we placed it in a beaker with water, and we boiled it using a hot plate, which you can see in the background right here. Here are before and after shots of the experiment. So in the first photo, we can see all of our 6 test tubes with a clear solution, and this is before we place them in their different temperatures, and this is when they contained only potato extract. And at the end of our experiment, after we went through all of the steps in our procedure, so after the 10 minutes in their different temperatures, when they contained potato extract and when we added catechol, they turned out looking like this. So let's examine these results. So for the 0 degree test tube over here, we can see that it did have a slight color change. It turned a bit brown. And for our 20 degrees, it also turned brown, which we can see here. For our 40 degree test tube, we can see the most change. It is very much darker than its original. And for the 60 degree test tube, we can see, yes, it had a color change, but it was minimal. It was very light. For our 80 degree test tube, there was really no change at all. And for our 100 degree test tube, really no change at all. So for our results and conclusions for the temperature experiment are that tube 1, which was the 0 degrees Celsius, we gave it a 2 on the color scale rating. So although it's not optimal temperature, the reaction with the potato extract was still able to occur. And we also gave our 20 degrees Celsius test tube a 2 as well, because it wasn't the optimal temperature, but it allowed the reaction to occur. Now for our 40 degrees Celsius test tube, we gave this one a 3, because here we saw the most color change. It was the darkest brown color out of all of our test tubes. So this showed us that this was the optimal temperature to allow the reaction to occur completely and effectively. So the reaction for between catechol and the potato extract enzyme. Moving on to test tube 4, which was 60 degrees Celsius, we gave it a 1 because although there was color change, it was definitely not the optimal temperature, and although it did allow the reaction to occur, it did not occur effectively. And for both test tubes 5 and 6, which contained which were 80 degrees Celsius and 100 degrees Celsius, there was really no color change at all. It was pretty much clear as it was in the beginning, so we concluded that no reaction occurred because the enzyme would have become denatured because 80 degrees and 100 degrees were too high of a temperature, not allowing potato extract to react with the catechol. So here is a graph of our results so we can better examine what actually took place. So in test tubes 1 and 2, which were both 0 and 20 degrees Celsius, we can see that they had a decent amount of color change according to the scale. And test tube 3, which was 40 degrees Celsius, had the most color change, which is why it peaked here at 3. And then we can see a decrease going down, so as the temperatures increased, so test tube 4, which was 60 degrees Celsius, it decreased to a 1, which had minimal color change, but the reaction still occurred. And moving on to test tubes 5 and 6, which were 80 degrees for test tube 5 and 100 degrees Celsius for test tube 6, we can see that no color change occurred. So as the temperature increased to 40 degrees Celsius, that was the point where the enzyme was most effective. But soon after, as soon as we increased the temperatures from 60 and below, the effectiveness of the enzyme decreased.